when if we don't realize this, we try and use evolutionary biology and evolutionary theory to model human systems, like reifying theory of markets based in evolutionary theory and social Darwinism writ large. And that actually, in my assessment, doesn't work. A lot of this insight on the fundamental difference of tech and evolution and highlighting it was something Forrest Landry helped me understand. But the model goes like this. In evolution, in evolved systems, we can kind of think of evolution as defined by three primary characteristics, which is mutation occurs and then selection occurs. But selection is two things. Does the agent survive and does it reproduce? So survival, selection, mate selection. And then obviously that is survival and mating within evolutionary niches. Now, something to understand about that is that the mutation pressures that are affecting everything in an ecosystem, there's a kind of evenness of the distribution of mutation pressures. Whether we're talking about gamma rays or oxidation or just copying errors or viruses, they're affecting all of the lions pretty similarly, and the lions and the gazelles and the plants. So we don't have radical mutation occurring in one place and no mutation occurring somewhere else. And so as you have a mutation that would make a lion faster or any predator faster, you have similar mutations that have a distribution in the fastness and slowness of the prey animals. So then, of course, if you get a little bit faster in one and they say the lion eats the slower gazelles, then the fastest gazelles reproduce, and that leads to doubling down on those genes. So that's the next part, is not just a evenness in the distribution of mutation, but also co-selective pressures. And so the advances anywhere lead to a pretty strong symmetric coupling of power across the whole system. And so this leads to a situation where you do have rivalrous dynamics in nature. You do have something like individual agents doing self-maximization. Of course, it's not purely that. We have a lot of symbiosis. We have animals that are paying attention to their young and animals that wouldn't survive if not for the whole group of animals. But you can model individual self-optimizing agents and get a certain successfulness if you have this symmetry of power. So you have this lion and this gazelle are in rivalrous dynamic, but all lions and all gazelles are symbiotic with each other, meaning the lions would die without the gazelles would die without the lions. And as either one makes an advancement, it drives the other one to make an advancement. So this is kind of where, when we think of social Darwinism, we think of the idea that competition drives innovation and advancement and those types of things. The difference when tech comes about is, so again, these changes in the animals are happening mediated through genetics, mutation of the genes, and then survival, and then recombinatorics of the genes. So the genes are physically instantiated pattern replicators. When technology, I don't just mean physical tech, I also mean language. I also mean social tech, coordination tech, but so techne in the Sanskrit sense of consciously mediated methods of doing things, basically things that come from the capacity for abstraction and creating abstract pattern replicators. The abstract pattern replicators can change much faster than the instantiated ones can, and they can change with an uneven distribution. So when we think about tool making, starting with Homo habilis and stone tools, right? Which is very different than a chimp using a rock that it finds, but not whittling sharper, or chipping a sharper rock, which is that the chimp or the bird or the whatever it is that's using something can experientially notice that this thing is better at doing what it wants than this thing is in the moment. But it can't understand that between all three rocks, why this one is better at cutting the thing is because of the abstract principle of sharpness, and then say, oh, I understand what mediates sharpness and I can design something with more sharpness. That abstraction capacity seems to be part of how we define early humans and then got doubled down in Homo sapiens. And it's a different process than evolution of bringing new stuff into existence. It's not occurring through kind of random mutation and just selective dynamics. It's occurring through an agent that's actually understanding something abstractly and intentionally creating it. And so if you think about evolution as the stuff that emerges, there wasn't a conscious choice to have something emerge. It emerged as the result of complexity dynamics. So it's unconscious, it's radically parallel, it's radically distributed, it's radically combinatoric, it's slow, almost everything fails, but you get an interoperability of everything. So what makes it through are very self-stabilizing complex systems. With technology, it's actually consciously created. It can happen in a local way, not everywhere. So it's not radically parallel and decentralized. It happens more in a serial fashion. And it creates parts that are not necessarily in equilibrium with whole systems. And so it really is mathematically almost an opposite kind of creative process. And the thing is, if you have an evolutionary agent like a human that has evolutionary motives, but is now able to, say, human operating as apex predator can increase its predatory capacity orders of magnitude rapidly, faster than the environment can increase its resilience to that predatory capacity. Now we have a fundamental problem. This is a lion getting 1,000 times faster in a hurry without gazelles being able to make a mutation in adequate time, and the lions eat all the gazelles and then go extinct. And so we have a situation where technology has broken the power symmetry that is what is necessary for the metastability of evolved systems. And so you see that not only is there a symmetry of power between the lion and the gazelle, there's also a symmetry of power between lions and gazelles and gazelles. The most badass lion is only, 2x or 1.5x more than the median lion. But if we look at Putin's killing ability or Trump's compared to yours or mine, it might be billions or trillions of times more. And the same we could say for economic capacity. And if you look at sapiens writ large compared to the rest of the biosphere, it's similar. And so when you think about one lion, just even if it went rogue and didn't just kill to survive, just started killing everything it could, it has such limited destructive capacity. And that's not true. And especially as we get into decentralized exponential tech, one actor or a small group of actors has really radical amplification of agency. So if you keep having rivalrous basis for agency, but with very high power relative to the overall playing field, you end up getting a basis for fundamental instability.
And of course, it's not all about destruction either. Two data points that jump out at me that we are doing things that we think of as constructive that have to be getting well near our limits are, for instance, the fact that of the large mammals on Earth, it's now thought that the majority of the biomass is humans plus our domesticated animals. And when it comes to birds, it's even more radical. It's thought that the domesticated birds represent 70% of the biomass of all birds on Earth. And so there's nothing destructive, specifically destructive about catching and killing, but we've essentially engineered a technology which has co-opted a majority or 70% of the energetics and biomass of the biome. And it's continuing to grow exponentially, which strikes me as a very strong signal, which is very little talked about.
Yeah, so this is, kind of a limits of growth thing, as opposed to, say, a warfare or terrorism or, intentionally destructive thing. So think about this. When we think of apex predators, they evolved to fit a niche. And because their adaptive capacity is mediated through genes, through concrete pattern replicators, they don't do very well outside of that niche. And so polar bears don't leave the Arctic, right? And cheetahs don't leave the savanna, and orcas don't get out of the ocean. But because our apex predator capacity was mediated by tools, and we could make different tools, including different coverings for ourselves, and in different environments, when we would overkill an environment, rather than have our population stabilize, we would just move to a new environment and become the apex predator there. And so we went and became apex predator everywhere, overhunted and overfarmed environments everywhere, overfished, etc. That is really different than every other animal. And again, if we think of the examples you were just giving with total biodiversity loss and the relationship of total animal life in domestication versus wild, if you think about an apex predator like an orca or a great white shark in the ocean and how many, say, fish it can kill in an hour, and then you think about a ocean trawler with a mile-long drift net, it's just not even obviously we aren't apex predators. They can't destroy whole ecosystems. They also can't genetically engineer new creatures. So we have to stop modeling ourselves as apex predators, competing with each other to be better apex predators and take the top, because the destructive capacity, even of not intending to destruct, just of intending to extract, is well beyond the replenish rates of the system.
And on top of that, in our first episode with Simon Dedeo, we talked a fair amount about the rate of social evolution is accelerating. And, the rate of invention of new technologies, new capabilities is way faster now than it was just 30 years ago. And if we're already approaching the limits, or probably have exceeded the sustainable limits of our society, and we have social evolution that's going exponential, and we still have a rising world population, last I saw projected to top out at 11 billion, with many of those people expecting a increase in their lifestyle, quote unquote, towards the American and European one. Looks like to me a train wreck coming at very high speed.
Right. And so again, this idea that we didn't start over hunting an environment and then it became harder to eat and breed. So then we came into sustainable population with the environment. We just moved to another environment. There is this kind of rebound effect that we see with humans. And we see it in all of evolution, right? Like our friend Brett Weinstein will say, if there's an evolutionary niche, it will get filled with something, right? So in the similar sense, though, with humans, we don't have to wait for a genetic mutation. We can have a mimetic mutation to figure out how to exploit some new niche. And so this is where we get rebound effects where increases in efficiency don't lead to us being more sustainable with the environment. They lead to us figuring out how to have profitable exploits on more area. And so, when you look at something like the Jevons paradox or other abstractions of it, if I get a 20% increase in energy efficiency, we don't just use 20% less energy. We find whole new markets that weren't open based on now what's going to be profitable. We go exploit those and end up using more net energy as a result. And so when you look at like trying to figure out a steady state population doesn't actually work. It doesn't work the way that we like to model in evolutionary biology, with the way that humans continue to advance, increases in capacity and efficiency, and then exploit all of it.